Well, top of the morning. Welcome. We were saying in the green room that Davos gets off to an early start, so we're all on U.S. time and feeling the effects of it, but we're thrilled to be with you all. This is a great way to start Tuesday here at Davos. We've got really an all-star panel here, so I'm incredibly excited. I'm Jason Girzadas, the Deloitte CEO for the U.S., and we're excited to release here in Davos Deloitte's most recent State of AI report for the enterprise, and the discussion with our panelists will be around where we're at as we start 2025 with respect to AI in the enterprise, which is obviously a central point of already my time in Davos, and I'm sure the rest of the week, and we'll hear from each of our guests on their perspective. Deloitte will be releasing our report. It's our fourth edition of the report. It is a comprehensive global soundings of close to 3,000 executives across all sorts of enterprises who are providing their feedback on what they're experiencing around AI. And let me just share what some of the takeaways are of our survey, and then we'll dive right into the panel and get their perspectives. You know, I think one of them that is at the top of the list is, quite honestly, the pace of AI innovation is outstripping what enterprises can absolutely absorb. And so there's this dichotomy between where the innovation curve is at, the speed of innovation around model development, the use of data, synthetic data, the different scaling of compute to support AI, and how do enterprises absorb that given all the other challenges and complexities in the enterprise. And I think that's something that we, Deloitte, see in our work with serving enterprises, and I'm interested in the panel's view. The second takeaway is that the barriers for enterprises around AI adoption are also evolving. Based upon our survey findings, that regulatory compliance and regulatory concerns and sort of the variety of certainly state-based changes in the U.S., but then also in different jurisdictions around the world, and how do enterprises manage that sort of complexity and deal with the risk management and the implementation challenges associated with that evolving regulatory environment. It's another rising issue in terms of barriers. The third is this desire to move from impact, particularly in efficiency, to more differentiation. How do we leverage AI to not only create efficiency in some of the back office, particularly IT and other functional areas within the enterprise, to more customer differentiation, product differentiation? And I think the expectations around that shift in business value moving is something that there's high hopes for, and I think some concern about how quickly that will evolve and what are critical parts to unlocking that next set of value. And I think the last takeaway from the survey is around this reality of agentic AI being a reality. How do we help enterprises really adapt to and adopt this idea of the agentic digital FTE? What does that mean in terms of unlocking the full potential of AI? The number of respondents who said they're going to increase their investment is significant. That bodes well for all of our teams in terms of enterprise commitment to invest. But I think also real questions about what does that mean for workforce readiness, and how do they incorporate agents into the fabric of an enterprise across the board. So these are some of the issues I'm hoping we'll touch upon and get all your respective takes, but look forward to the Deloitte survey results and perusing that more deeply. So let me turn to our panelists and do a brief intro for each of you, and we'll then jump into the discussion. I want to first welcome Dr. Ruba Borno. Welcome from AWS. And Ruba is a Vice President of Global Specialists and Partners for AWS, and we're thrilled to have you here. Thank you. Antonio Nero, who's the President and CEO of HPE. We're really thrilled to have you here, given all of your leadership in the enterprise technology space, Antonio. And then Arsalan from Databricks. Welcome. Arsalan, Tavakoli.
Tavakoli. Just stick with
Tavakoli.
the first part, it's easier.
Yeah, I wanted to get it right.
Blame my parents, you know.
But Arsalan is the co-founder and SVP of Field Engineering for Databricks. So we have real depth of expertise here on this panel, and I think we'll have a great perspective on the state of generative AI. So Antonio, I want to start with you, if I may. You are at the forefront of generative AI as an enterprise. How are you thinking about this issue that I raised at the onset, which is the urgency of tapping into the innovation curve, but also the barriers of enterprises actually responding to the pace of change and moving fast enough? How is it that you're supporting your clients in that dilemma?
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Jason and Joe, for inviting me today. Well, HP is uniquely positioned because we support every customer segment, and when you think about AI, we differentiate the market in three unique segments. One is the enterprise, which obviously is the topic of today. The second is the sovereign aspects. Obviously, here in Davos, there will be a lot of discussion how AI is being advanced at the sovereign level in geographies where they have the means and the capabilities to go invest. And then the third one is people like Arsalan and AWS and others, which are building this very, very large model that need enormous amount of computing capacity. And there are these other challenges in terms of scale, cooling and power, and obviously sustainability. But in the context of the enterprise, I think you said it well. I think, first of all, nobody wants to be left behind. We saw that through the digital transformation where through the COVID pandemic, those who were already digitized, they were better prepared to handle the crisis, and moving from being at the office to work from home and remotely and then be able to serve the customer needs through the digital means was absolutely a necessity. When you think about AI, obviously the transformative power that technology has, if you are not on the loop, I will say, you will be left behind. However, it comes with challenges. In enterprise today, I think we're still early in the adoption. I think it's fair to say we're going for what I call the exploration to implementation. We as a company, HPE, just as an example, we are going through approximately 250 use cases that we look collective across the organization.
Within your own enterprise.
My own enterprise, right? Whether it is to drive efficiency or to drive better experiences in a differentiation approach. And the reality is that while many of them are already in production, some of them fail. And so the fail fast and improve mentality is important because you have to iterate to understand what the return on investment is. But I think it's fair to say that customers are realizing that it's going to come down to the simplicity of the offer, the ability to understand the data, and obviously companies like Databricks plays an enormous role because without the data you can't do anything. And then ultimately is stitching workflows. It's not just one large language model that hopefully addresses all the needs, but is really about how you stitch a workflow that ultimately simplifies everything you do, drive the digitization and automation, and then where it's appropriate, use the AI. So we as a company, obviously, we provide a hybrid experience because we believe in the end it's going to be a hybrid approach. It's not like I move everything to one location, whatever location it is, but it's using the capabilities that ultimately comes together in a simplicity of the consumption model, and then ultimately be able to deploy. And in our case, we constructed a private cloud AI solution that basically 3 clicks, 30 seconds, you deploy your AI. And that's how simple it needs to come. Otherwise, the barriers to adoption is going to be too high. But again, nobody wants to be left behind by geo, different challenges, you name compliance, security. I think, the adoption of public API is still too early in many ways because they're afraid, what this does to me, it doesn't do to me. But if you think about, when we went through the telephone adoption, it took decades to have 50 million users. We have 50 million users on ChatGPT in a month. So the pace of adoption is going to be accelerated. And I think 2025 will be probably the year we're going to see a faster use of this technology across the enterprise.
So you're bullish on...
I am because, the technology has proven to be incredibly successful. It doesn't mean it doesn't come with other challenges. But, as I always said, the engineering side is the easy part. The commercial side is the hardest part. So as an engineer, you say, well, we can go solve this problem.
Yeah.
But I think also we have to think about the other challenges. And European customers here in particular are way more aware and acutely interested in solving the utilization of AI with the ethics principles, including sustainability. And that's why, when we think about the engineering challenge, is how we use this compute power. You think about AWS, right, while reducing the carbon footprint. And that's something that we as a company do very well, especially because we have deployed the largest supercomputers on the planet.
So Arsalan, I want to bring you into the conversation. I think in my client conversations, enterprise data may be the most difficult issue that gets referenced. We're seeing many clients, I'm sure you can speak to, the massive investments in data infrastructure, data improvement. Where are we at on that journey from your perspective? And what would you say to an enterprise today in terms of, how do they mobilize? What should they be focused on today in order to take advantage of the possibilities?
Yeah, short answer is it is critical. I think Antonio said, in the enterprise, AI doesn't really mean anything without data. And I think it's funny. So, Databricks been around for 11 years ago. And we were always a data and AI company. But 11 years ago, you screamed the data part and you whispered AI, because AI was like self-driving cars and iRobot, nobody cares. Now, what the problem was, once you hit ChatGPT, everybody screamed AI, and you were like, don't forget about the data. So the journey that we saw many organizations go to is, I think Antonio, it was being fear of missing out was high. So everybody was like, I don't exactly know what generative AI is, but I've been told I'm behind. And you would talk to people and they would have statistics like, I have 200 RAG POCs going on. I'm like, who cares? So it was all about this experimentation phase. And then what generally happened is they would do an experimentation and then somebody would say, well, you have to show something that is actually meaningful, which means it's tied to your data. And they would look around like, crap, my actual data infrastructure isn't in place. So the number of, now I've seen that acceleration of conversation that people are saying, how do I get my data, kind of estate in order? And what does that actually mean? It's not so much about the physical data moving it to one place, but it's, can you make your data consumable is the bigger thing. Do you actually understand quality? Do you understand what's actually in there? Do you understand who's using it? How are they using it? Do you understand lineage? Because all those become important. So I think, what we've seen now is many organizations are moving forward with AI, but the AI effort has triggered a significant move towards how do we get kind of the data state in order to be able to leverage it. And the other reason for that is that you mentioned it, AI is just moving so fast right now. And so the no regret move for people is getting data in order. You talk to an organization, a year ago, it was all you need is prompt engineers. My mom called me, she said, you're going to be out of a job, go become a prompt engineer. That's all you need to do. Then it was RAG. RAG is going to solve all the world's problems. And then it was fine tuning. And then every week you have a different model coming out. And, we released a model and our CEO jokes, we paid a bunch of money to have the best model in the world for 2 weeks before the next one comes out. So in that spirit of change, the one constant is going to be tailoring it to your data and domain is important. So there's been a lot of movement towards how do we make sure that data estate and the data is consumable to set folks up for taking advantage of AI.
Is there a way to think about what a leading enterprise in 2025 will be doing around its data from your perspective? What does leading enterprise look like around an integrated data strategy in this time and space?
Well, I think I keep saying Antonio said the right thing. I'm just going to let him go first all the time. But look, I think that the funny part is we tend to talk about technical solutions. And I'm a technologist. I like the technical solutions. And here's what the catalog is going to look like. We spend most time talking about the platform, but people and process are by far the most important things. The majority of my conversations are people say, okay, we've picked this. Can you explain to me how we get there? What are the best practices? And so there is a lot for when you talk about what good looks like. Yes, they've got kind of a catalog, they've got it governed and all those pieces, but they actually have an understanding of what is the data that they have in the organization. They've kind of invested in upskilling their people, not just technical notion, but how do you have a culture of data? How do you use data for decision making? How do you have processes that many organizations have data that they generated that they didn't think was valuable, but now is valuable? How do you make it available to other people and to partners as well? So there is a lot of that process and people in place. And The last part is people have over-rotated to say everything is valuable. And so you're now kind of starting to see a lot of CFOs that are like, okay, so how much am I paying for that? And what am I getting for that? So there's a lot more of, which sounds very simple, of have you defined what your ROI is? Have you defined what success is? Have you defined, great, if you show that this works, does it matter or not? So those pieces on the process and people to get that in place, I think that that's what great looks like. We can go into the details of the platform, but I think what really separates the good from the great are that, culture of understanding data and AI and weaving it through their organization, which really sets them up to be successful.
So Ruba, I want to bring you into the conversation. In your role around AWS, you look after all your specialists and ecosystem partners. So if you're talking to an enterprise client from your lens, and they're trying to stitch together the ecosystem partners to execute their AI strategy, how are you talking to them about doing that?
Well, I'll talk about the fun stuff, which is governance, compliance, and security. I think actually when generative AI started really picking up steam, the first partnership we signed with Deloitte was focused on security and how to ensure that customers are thinking about the secure posture of their data as it relates to wherever it's going to go. So, your study covered that I think more than 2/3 of companies are exploring Agentic AI. When you think about Agentic AI, where the agent is going to be making decisions or taking actions based on data, are we aware of which agent has access to what data? Should they have access to it? And we're in Europe, and data sovereignty is obviously really key there. So making sure that you've got the guardrails set up early on. I think that the biggest differentiator between proof of concept to scale is actually thinking through some of those foundational elements of security, governance, and compliance, and designing it up front. So often I ensure that when I'm talking with our customers or our partners, there's got to be 2 parallel tracks. So think through all of the proofs of concepts, the amazing ideas you have, the innovation, but in parallel, make sure you've got the security, the governance, the compliance, the data foundational elements in place so that when you're ready to scale them, they grow without exposing the business to any risks. So I think that's something where it's the really hard part, and you've got to start it on day 0, or otherwise by the time you figure out which of the 250 you want to scale, you're going to be in trouble lagging without having that in place.
Well, maybe I can ask you, Antonio, also to speak to this, which is, if this is truly one of the greatest barriers is enterprises' navigation of the regulatory environment, how are you as an enterprise sort of supporting your clients with respect to navigating all that? Is that sort of baked into your product road mapping and sort of approach to serving enterprises? Because it strikes me that that's going to be, continue to get even a more complicated landscape.
But that's why we have partnerships like yours. That's important, right? So, the fact of the matter is that we need an ecosystem of partner to really guide the customer through the journey of adoption. And, obviously, whether it's the definition of the use case or, establishing the right governance around it, these are things that customers really care, but they don't know yet how to go about it. In many cases, they want to understand best practices, understand, financial models, how to measure ROI, think about best security practices, obviously all the data governance. So we have obviously an advisory component that is embedded, but whether it's depth or reach, this is why partnerships like the one that we have with Deloitte are so critical, because we are truly complementary. We are the core, we're a technology company that understands enterprises in every vertical. We bring that expertise, but the reality we need more. And so we have put together a set of principles around AI, how ethics plays a role, how obviously security plays a role. But, when you go through this conversation, it depends where the customer is in that journey, right? Some of them already figured that out, and we just go into the technology part. And some are very, very early, and therefore we work with our partners to help them bridge that gap.
What about Databricks? What's your view of these barriers, and particularly this consistent reference to the regulatory constraints as a headwind to further advancing it? Is there a point of view that you espouse?
Yeah, look, I think regulatory is, kind of one of those pieces, but it's very clear, like what we've seen is people have gone through different phases. I think phase one was just figuring out what GenAI is and understanding how it's going to be. We've kind of come a little bit over the hype cycle. Now people are trying to figure out what's valuable. But the part where I still see most organizations stuck on is, how do I actually move AI into production? That is still where I would argue that most are stuck. And where you see where AI has been successful, I'd argue predominantly, is like the consumer side. My daughter uses ChatGPT all the time, asks me questions, and that's fine. In the enterprise side, I think we are starting to see success in the what I would call the productivity side. So all of the co-pilots, all the document summarization, getting people access to data, maybe last mile helping like customer success agents and so forth. People are still worried about anywhere where you're putting it out to end users, and regulatory is one of them, but just in general, the quality of the models, the hallucination, the accuracy is not yet where people are, where they feel like highly, highly comfortable about it, right? And so, from our perspective, I think that there is a couple of things that we spend a lot of time on. One is just being aware of what are all of the different regulatory requirements and helping organizations do that. And a lot of it is, how do you measure bias in your models? How do you kind of understand the accuracy? How do you prevent hallucinations? How do you understand, like I think Ruba mentioned it, great, you have a model, but two different people who interact it have access to underlying data that's different. How do you basically segment that? Those are kind of all super important. But the last part is, people are trying to do this against a backdrop that the underlying technologies are changing extremely rapidly, right? So it's like, okay, I've figured out that I want to put a use case in production. Just as I was now, GPT is talking about, OpenAI is talking about, O3. Yeah. And then Meta is talking about Llama. How do I think about which one? How do I incorporate it? And the answer is, AI is not as simple as I ask a question, I get an answer. We'll talk about agents here in a bit, but it's a very complex orchestration. So how do you reason through that? So we spend a lot of our time actually not on how do you pick a model, but how do you build an end-to-end production system that satisfies those and is one that can evolve as you basically take on new use cases or you basically take on new technologies underneath. I think that's the hard part, that people want to set themselves up for success. I think in 2025, you will start seeing it. Some things are accelerating. I still think that notion of no human in the loop interacting with end users, you'll start seeing some of it in 2025. But to get to the point on accuracy and regulatory, I think it'll be a couple of years before you start seeing kind of crossing the chasm and more users get there.
Let's come back to this topic of differentiation in a business. The desire to move from just efficiency gains around software development or IT ops to true business differentiation. Are you seeing what are some of your favorite examples of what you're seeing with some of your clients around where this notion of true business differentiation is starting to be demonstrated? Any examples that come to mind?
Yeah, actually, the greatest example that I love using is actually our own with Amazon. So we call it practical AI because the goal is, what is the return on investment you're going to get? So Arsalan mentioned, there's so many different models. And when we were building our generative AI portfolio, model choice was at the core of it. So we developed a service called Amazon Bedrock. We've got our own foundation models with Nova, Amazon Nova and Amazon Titan, but we also have this broader partner network where we have a partnership with Anthropic, we've got partnership with Mistral, with Meta on Llama. And the reason is that each model could be used for a different purpose, a different use case. And you don't want to be in a situation where you're over-engineering, you're using a really compute-intensive model for maybe something that could use a lighter fit model. And something that a lot of our partners are helping customers with is maybe even developing their own models that are using their data and are very fit for purpose for a specific application. And so that's why model choice is so key. And so on the Amazon side, we're using generative AI across the entire business. Has everyone here bought something from Amazon before? So
this morning?
Yeah, the interface that you interact with. We used generative AI to improve the customer support experience. And if you think about the number of Amazon customers that interact with this, through generative AI, we actually improved customer satisfaction by 500 basis points. Think about how many people had to have a positive experience across that platform to receive that improvement. And then from the efficiency side, if you think about thousands of fulfillment centers and distribution centers, we use it for inventory management, for forecasting, so long-term forecasting, regional forecasting. On the long-term side, it's 10% greater efficiency. On the regional side, 20% greater efficiency. At our scale, that's massive. And then on my team, one of the services we run is the AWS Marketplace. And that's how our enterprise customers interact with some of our third-party partners and get their solutions and their SaaS offers. And there we're helping customers go through 20,000 services, mine them, determine which ones would be best suited for their use cases and provide that better customer experience. So it isn't just on the cost side, though I think the cost side is necessary because that funds some of those greater kind of new innovative top-line driving efforts. But I love the examples that we're seeing in our own business. There's lots that we're doing with our partners to support customers on the productivity side, on the customer satisfaction side. But I think thinking about it in a practical sense is really critical. So we just try to focus on practical AI, and I think that that's been really high return for us.
Love that. Antonio, how about you? What bright spots in terms of use cases are you most excited by? Whether it's in HPE or...
No, I mean, obviously, on our side, we use it across a number of domains, whether it's in forecast planning, customer service and the like. I will say I am actually part of the healthcare business, and it's quite fascinating to see how data is being used in generative AI to improve healthcare, right? So be able to provide genomic sequencing and DNA and targeting exactly how you should think about your health. Also in the fact that be more accurate on the diagnosis of diseases. So these are things that to me are very important because it's not just a business, it's also the ability to go solve some of the biggest societal challenges that we have in front of us and be more inclusive and equitable, because I think that's the other piece of AI. When you think about, today where we are, even with connectivity, and the COVID was a great example. You would think the United States probably the most connected country. There were geographies in the US that they have no connectivity. Kids could not, download the homework and the like. So AI will be even probably a bigger gap in my mind. So we need to go think about that and how we avoid that to happen. But, there is many use cases in marketing and the like. To me, in the end, is how we think about the use of these models to improve experiences. And I argue that while there's going to be this agentic model where you have the mix of experts, as we call it, I think I'd rather have a model have less parameters and better data, because we're going to become more accurate, which is good for him in the end. But I will say, people talk about trillions and trillions of parameters, but in the end, maybe a model with 500 billion parameters, but better data is going to be way more useful in many ways. So you have to find the right balance.
It was interesting last night at a dinner discussion, Dario from Anthropic was made a provocation that there will be 100 years of progress in the next decade. He mentioned the drug discovery and tailored therapies. That's an interesting provocation to say, are we on that type of innovation curve, which is not just efficiency, but true quality of life impact, 100 years of benefit over 10 years.
In agriculture, the fact that we can actually improve the yields and the quality of seeds in the agriculture is just amazing. You find in the right temperature, the right watering, and all of that. And be able to solve the food problem, right? There's 800 million people today, every day, go without having the right nutrition. So that's exciting.
Although in the survey results, it's interesting, the number one use case is around cybersecurity, and I will say that I would welcome more generative AI innovation around cybersecurity defense, because it's a practical reality for all enterprises today, right? While we're still looking for differentiation, there's real impact on more fundamental business issues that we all face. Let's talk about agentic models and the future of it. That's been sort of, you were saying earlier how there's sort of always the topic du jour. So I think we're now in the agentic age. What give us your definition of it, and also maybe your prediction of where we're headed with that. And I'll ask each of you also to do the same.
Yeah, my favorite part of when things are moving fast is I'll ask 5 people what they mean by agentic. I'll get 9 answers. Yeah. So it's like you kind of know that it's moving fast. Look, I think we tend to overcomplicate things. So I think at the end of the day, on AI, what happened was, let's take generative AI. I mean, we focused on that. There's actually AI is much broader, but generative AI, everybody seems to think, okay, there's a model. I ask a question, I get an answer. That's actually not that useful in practice. Generally, what you actually want to have happen is your end goal is defined as not asking a question. It's, I have a task that I want to get done, right? And how do you help me automate and get the task done? That's ultimately the goal. And when people talk about agents, I think that there's a couple of things in there. It's one, you're driven by a task, which means that you have some kind of reward and utility function, right? So I've done something and I know that the task actually got completed. That's one. The second piece is that in general, it's much more complex than people think. I think most people in their mind think, I ask a question, I get an answer, just like ChatGPT, that's AI. The example I give is like, think about building a house. Building a house, you don't necessarily just go find one person and say, build my house. Building a house, you have an electrician, you have a plumber, you have somebody who understands. You have experts who understand those different pieces, and you need to understand how you bring them together. And then the last thing that's a really big part of, I think agents is that somewhere along the lines, we started also thinking that no matter what the question is, the answer is an LLM will solve it. And it's not true. There's many things still that we have a bunch of other systems that are much better at, whether it's actuating things in the real world or even like answering simple, like who is the top like salesperson. It's like it's better to ask a database than it is to have it. So agents also mean that they know when to use which tool, and a tool may be something completely outside of AI with the rest of the world. And they know how, if we get stuck, how do you adapt? How do you understand, like getting closer to like how a human would think about building a task. So I think that's the way where folks are going, because they feel like if I truly want to automate tasks and either get productivity or cost savings, like agents will help there. But as you might imagine, all of the challenges we've been talking about, agents just basically, the complexity of it just grows like by an order of magnitude or exponentially. And so it's, how do you think about many different models? How do you think about cost? How do you think about bias when you're striping across all of those? But I think you're starting to see that piece where a lot of the focus for enterprises now, okay, how do I build something like that that's successful? And the conversation, which I think is good, has moved beyond, do I pick this model or this model? It's how do I focus on the task and all the other elements to put that in production? It's where we're seeing a lot of enterprises go. It's where, we also spend a lot of our time. And I do think that is the future, how people will actually leverage AI. Again, it's centered around a task to actually be completed.
I like that notion of the house in terms of all that's entailed in it, as well as if you have an exceptional agent, it's almost like an exceptional executive or an exceptional employee. They're resourceful. They know where to go to for what. So it's multi-dimensional. Ruba, what's your view on the agentic wave? Where are you looking for that to go next, and how do you define it?
Well, I think Arsalan's definition was really good. Maybe a synonym could be like a digital worker, a digital colleague that's there to support you. And I think there's an era of where a lot of us are like human routers. Hey, you need to talk to that person or talk to that person to get the right solution together and collaborate. And if you think about how agentic, how agents are going to change workflows, you've now got those digital colleagues available to you 24/7, available on a moment's notice. You don't have to worry about scheduling a meeting for 2 weeks. You're all there together to cover each element of the workflow. And so I think getting them inserted into the workflow at a task-based system is really key. So I was actually speaking with another partner last night, and they've actually developed 1.6 million digital workers for specific tasks. I mean, these aren't, they're like micro tasks, but they're there to support the knowledge worker at each step along the way. So it's there to augment the human capability. Over time, those digital workers will become more and more capable. And I think every knowledge worker's got to think through, okay, how am I going to be able to add a lot more value instead of reinventing the wheel on that 80% that the digital worker is helping me with? But they're there to help us, I think, make decisions faster, move faster, have that availability at all times. And so I would think of them as digital colleagues that are always there for us.
It's really a huge challenge for the enterprise, right? To think about incorporating into your workforce digital FTEs. What's your view of that? Are you bullish about it and for your own team?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think now you need someone who can help orchestrate all of this at some point, right? So talk about these digital workers. But in his analogy, I guess you need the architect and interior designer. Let me bring it together, in a way that works for me. And then there is a big cultural piece through, right? So if you think about it, even here in Europe, talk about cyber, but also talk about culture. The incorporation of your cultural beliefs and values into the fabric of what these digital workers can do is going to be very, very important. So no question that, as these micro models become more intelligent in many ways, they will be pervasive across that workflow. And that's why, BPO, business process optimization, is a critical practice. And obviously, you guys at Deloitte help many customers re-architect the processes. So I think you have to rethink the enterprise from inside out, using these capabilities in a way that's not just on top of what you do, but how you change the way you do things in a completely different way. And that's where the differentiation gets created. And I think that's the opportunity every enterprise has.
So maybe we can come to some fruition here with our discussion about 2025 and what you're looking forward to, and maybe some of what you're concerned by or what you're going to watch closely this year. So there's something that you're optimistic about, or you think will be come into reality this year around AI in the enterprise space, and something that you think that is going to have to be something in the landscape we're going to have to navigate. So what would you say, Arsalan, about 2025 and maybe your prediction to the positive and to the challenge?
Yeah, look, so I think a couple of things are going to happen. I do think it was one of those funny things. I mean, it kind of goes to Dario's quote last night. I think a year ago, I would say that people are overly bullish on how fast. They expect overnight AI is going to make an impact. But then once you can call it the trial of disillusionment or whatever you want, then I start thinking that people are way too bearish about how long it takes. I think the speed that people will see AI and those capabilities improve is going to be much faster than they think. Things I'm personally looking forward to is I do think seeing more and more agents deployed. The reason I'm interested in it is because we still have a lot of examples of AI happened and we think it's a useful use case. Like, Ruba had actually some kind of data points on, customer sat, but many of folks say, we did this, we deploy this, people are more productive. And I'm like, well, did you save cost? No, people just that time went somewhere else. They did some. Starting to get actual examples of here is where AI was used to drive these tasks. And we were at clear examples of not just we took productivity and cost, but here's where we moved faster, drove kind of more revenue, more new capabilities. I think seeing those come on will give a blueprint for many other organizations to do so. I think that's really good. I think the thing that still worries me is that there are still a lot of people who come at it from a technology-centric perspective, and they go way down the rabbit hole of, I pick this technology, get it to work, without setting up that infrastructure of understanding, whether it's the data, whether it's understanding what do you want out of it, what success looks like. And the problem is, done poorly in those organizations, you will exhaust the inner goodwill for experimenting with it. It'll be like, here's yet another pipe dream. We spent a lot of money, and it'll pause and slow down the ultimate progress in some of those organizations. So we always try to make sure, don't pick 300 projects. What are the 2 or 3 that make sense? Show value out of it and then move on. Some people, unfortunately, keep going down the wrong path. And that is my big worry of it'll slow down their ability to adopt some of the new technologies.
Yeah, the focus on business impact will actually create more momentum to do more versus less. Ruba, what's your view?
I think every single industry is just going to be fundamentally transformed with this tech. I mean, and the more use cases and proof points that we see, I think it'll inspire. So those early adopters are sort of taking one for the team where they're making that upfront investment. But then once it's deployed, I mean, if you think about how the creative industry's completely getting transformed by generative AI. Do you remember that jingle, meow, 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 meow? The guy that wrote that jingle, Shelley Palmer, actually, I met with him, and he's one of the early adopters of GenAI because he's saying, my old job would have not existed. Because generative AI, you can now get a jingle in 5 seconds, and I used to get paid whatever to come up with these examples. So I think every single industry will be fundamentally transformed. a company's appetite and willingness to change and readiness to change is going to determine whether or not they're able to survive. So it's happening, it's coming, making sure you've got that data foundation, that security foundation, and frankly, the ability to actually flex your business processes is going to be key. But I think this year we're going to see some pretty big changes in every single industry, whether it's healthcare, pharmaceutical, discovery. We talked about the creative industry, financial services. Not a single industry won't be touched, and those who don't adopt, I do think, will be left behind.
No, listen, on a balance, I'm very positive, but there are some good things and bad things you have to think through, right? So the technology piece, we three of us get embedded every day. We can see the pace of innovation moving at incredible speed. So the technology will be there, whether it's in the next 6 months, 12 months, or 36 months. The pace is just unbelievable. But I think on the negative side, I think over-regulation is going to be a challenge, but you need regulation here, no question whatsoever. And I think the private sector needs to be at the table helping the public sector, which needs to be so far behind in understanding the implications, the ramifications, because that helps both sides, not being overly regulated, but at the same time have the right regulation. I think the cost of this technology is not cheap. It's incredibly expensive. And so that will create, in my mind, a gap that those who has the means, will maybe ahead over those who don't have the means. The third piece is the impact to the planet. Listen, we got to think through how this is going to be resolved, because it's not just what is the latest GPU or the latest software stack that he may come for the data piece or AWS. It's also the power, the grid, and everything else that goes in that infrastructure. And then potentially the over-concentration of people who has the capabilities to build these models, right? And I think, that's something that must be understood. So I welcome, tremendous competition. I think eventually these models, in many ways, will be commoditized because, the scale will be available. So where the difference is going to come is that human understanding on how to use these technologies. And I believe all of us in this room, whether you are in technology or not, you will have to have a minor in AI. You got to understand how this technology works. You have to understand how to use it. And I think, the entire education system will have to change a little bit, Normally, in the United States, you go to get a major or a minor on something. I think the minor will be, by default, AI, unless you want to be an AI engineer of sorts. Yeah. But on balance, I'm still positive, not different than other major industrial revolutions or technology revolutions. It's just that this one feels slightly different, and the speed by which it's evolving is probably a little more scary than other ones.
Well, that's a great way to end. So I want to thank you all. It's been a great discussion. I think it's a good framework for the whole week of Davos, frankly, and all the discussions that will to come, and amazing prospects for 2025. But as you say, Antonio, lots of considerations to make sure that on balance it's positive for all the other human considerations that you mentioned. So Antonio, Neri, HP, thank you.
Thank you.
Arsalan, Tavakoli from Databricks, thank you. I got it right?
You got it.
Right. And Ruba, Borno, thank you from AWS. All, thank you for your partnership, and thank you for getting up early to join us here this morning. Thank you all.
Thanks,
Thank you.